Did you know that the most expensive movie ever made at the time almost sank the entire studio that paid for it before a single ticket was sold? Titanic was more than a love story. It was a miracle, a disaster, a dream that almost became a nightmare. Director James Cameron spent so much money and so much time making this film that people thought he had lost his mind. But he hadn't. He had a vision, and that vision changed movies forever. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Titanic. Number 20. The budget that broke Hollywood. Here is something that will make your jaw drop. When James Cameron first told the studio how much money he needed to make Titanic, the executives nearly fainted. The final budget for the film reached around $200 million. That made it the most expensive movie ever made at that point in history. To put that in perspective, the actual Titanic ship itself cost around $7.5 million to build back in 1912. So the movie about the ship cost more than 25 times the price of the real thing. Wrap your head around that for a second. The studio behind the film, 20th Century Fox, was terrified. They were so worried about losing money that they brought in another studio, Paramount Pictures, to share the risk. Even with two major studios splitting the bill, people inside Hollywood were whispering that James Cameron had completely lost his mind. Journalists wrote articles predicting the film would be a legendary failure. Some called it the next Heaven's Gate, referring to a famous Hollywood disaster from the 1980s that nearly destroyed a studio on its own. Cameron heard all of this. He read the headlines. He knew what people were saying, and he kept building anyway. He built a massive tank near the coast of Rosarito, Mexico, just to hold a replica of the Titanic. He hired thousands of crew members. He spent months filming underwater footage of the actual shipwreck. Sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, he refused to cut corners. He refused to make a cheaper version of his dream. And when the film finally opened in December of 1997, every single doubt was washed away like rain off a deck. Titanic earned over $1 billion in its first few weeks. It went on to become the highest-grossing film in history at the time, earning nearly $2 billion worldwide. The studio that almost collapsed under the weight of its budget ended up celebrating the biggest success in cinema history. What looked like madness was actually genius. Number 19. James Cameron Dove to the real wreck. Before Cameron wrote a single word of the script, he did something almost no Hollywood director has ever done. He went down to see the real Titanic, the actual ship, the one sitting nearly 2.5 miles beneath the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean. He did not just watch documentary footage or look at photographs. He got into a small submersible vehicle, no bigger than a large bathtub, and dove all the way down to the wreck himself. He did this not once, but 12 times during the production of the film. 12 dives into the dark, freezing, crushing depth of the ocean. Each dive took hours just to get down and hours to get back up. The pressure at that depth is so extreme that it can crush steel like a tin can. The temperature is just above freezing. There is no sunlight, no sound from the surface, just blackness and silence and the ghostly remains of a ship that took over 1,500 lives. Cameron brought cameras with him on those dives. He filmed the real corridors, the real staircases, the real grand staircase landing, now covered in rust and sea creatures, but still recognizable. He filmed the chandeliers, now transformed by the ocean into something strange and beautiful. He filmed the portholes and the boilers and the rooms where people once slept and laughed and danced. All of that footage became the foundation for the film. When you see the opening scenes of Titanic, with the camera moving through the dark ruins of the sunken ship, those images are real. They are not special effects. They are not models. They are the actual Titanic, filmed by Cameron himself in total darkness at the bottom of the sea. He once said that making the film was just an excuse to visit the wreck. He was only half joking. That wasn't just filmmaking, it was a pilgrimage. Number 18. The ship was built backwards. Here is something strange that almost nobody knows. When the production team built their massive replica of the Titanic for filming, they built it facing the wrong direction. The ship was constructed in mirror image, completely reversed from the real thing. The reason was simple, but clever. The coast at Rosarito, Mexico, where they built the set, faced a particular direction. The light from the sun moved across the sky in a way that only worked well for filming if the ship faced a certain way. For the best possible natural lighting, the ship had to be turned around. But this created a big problem. On the real Titanic, the port side was on the left and the starboard side was on the right. As you face the front of the ship, on the movie replica, those sides were swapped. Every detail on the real ship was now mirrored. This meant that every piece of writing, every door handle, every number on every lifeboat, all of it was backwards. So the production team came up with an equally strange solution. They flipped the image when editing. They used a mirror during filming. They had the actors write their names backwards so that when the image was reversed in post-production, the writing would look correct on screen. The cast and crew had to do everything in reverse. Actors learned to use their left hands as their right hands. Some signs were printed in mirror image. People walked differently and moved differently just so the final picture would look natural. If you watch the film very carefully, there are small moments where you can spot the error. A small detail here or there that slipped through the correction. Film fans have spent years hunting for those tiny reversed moments. What looked perfectly real was secretly a mirror image of the truth. Number 17. Leonardo DiCaprio. Almost said no. It is almost impossible to imagine Titanic without Leonardo DiCaprio as Jack Dawson. But the truth is, Leonardo came very close to turning the role down entirely. He was not sure he wanted to make a big Hollywood romance. He was at a point in his career where he was making darker, more serious films, and he worried that playing a romantic lead in a blockbuster would hurt his reputation as a serious actor. James Cameron had to work hard to convince him. According to people who were in those early meetings, Cameron practically begged DiCaprio to take the role. He explained his vision. He described the scale of the film. He told Leonardo that this was not going to be just another love story. It was going to be a film about the human spirit, about class and tragedy and survival, wrapped inside an epic disaster on the grandest scale ever attempted. Cameron even drew a sketch of Jack Dawson during one of their meetings to show DiCaprio what he saw in the character. Leonardo still hesitated. He reportedly told Cameron that he did not want to do a cheesy love story. Cameron reportedly looked at him and said something like, "I don't want to make a cheesy love story either. Are you in or not?" Something about that directness clicked. DiCaprio said yes. And when the film came out, Leonardo DiCaprio became one of the biggest stars on the planet almost overnight. His face was on magazine covers around the world. Teenagers filled theaters again and again just to see him. He became a symbol of a generation. And it all started with a moment of hesitation and a very determined director who refused to take no for an answer. That wasn't just casting, it changed the course of movie history. Number 16. Kate Winslet injured herself several times. Kate Winslet threw herself into the role of Rose DeWitt Bukater with incredible commitment. But that commitment came with a painful price. During the making of Titanic, Winslet suffered through physical hardship that most actors would never agree to endure. She broke a rib during filming. That is not a metaphor or an exaggeration. During one of the intense action sequences, she actually cracked a rib. She also developed a serious cough from spending so much time in the cold water used for the film's flooding scenes. The water in the tank built for the film was kept cold, but not freezing. Still, after hours of shooting, with the water constantly hitting her body, Winslet described it as a physically exhausting and sometimes genuinely frightening experience. She was underwater, surrounded by sinking set pieces, in low light, with cameras rolling and the clock always ticking. There was no luxury version of those scenes. They had to be done for real, in the water, again and again, until Cameron was satisfied. Winslet also bruised her body repeatedly from the physical requirements of the role. Running through corridors, climbing over railings, being thrown around by rushing water, none of that was gentle. She once said in an interview that she would never work with James Cameron again. She later clarified that she was mostly joking, but there was truth underneath the humor. Despite all of it, her performance in the film is extraordinary. Every moment of fear you see in her eyes during those flooding sequences, that was not entirely acting. Some of that fear was completely, genuinely real. What looked like great acting was also just real survival. Number 15. The grand staircase was built to be destroyed. One of the most beautiful sets in the entire film is the grand staircase, a sweeping, elegant wooden masterpiece that represents the luxury and beauty of the first-class experience on the Titanic. The production team spent months designing and building it. Expert craftsmen carved the woodwork by hand. The details were modeled as closely as possible on photographs of the real staircase from 1912. Every banister, every carved detail, every inch of the thing was a labor of love. And then they destroyed it on purpose. When the time came to film the flooding scenes in the staircase area, Cameron decided he wanted to do it for real. He did not want to use digital effects or miniatures. He wanted real water rushing through a real set. So the production team rigged the set with explosive doors. They filled a massive tank of water above the set and connected it to the staircase area with controlled release systems. When Cameron called action, the doors burst open and hundreds of thousands of gallons of water came crashing down the staircase in one enormous, unstoppable wave. The beautiful set, built with such incredible care and detail, was completely destroyed in a matter of seconds. The wood buckled and splintered. The carved banisters broke apart. The ornate details were swept away. The entire thing, months of work, gone in one breathtaking, explosive moment. They could only film that scene once. There was no going back. The cameras had better be rolling, the angles had better be right, and the performances had better be perfect. Because the grand staircase flooding was a one-time event, it was built to be beautiful. Then it was built to be broken. Number 14, the film has no villain. Here is something interesting to think about. In most disaster films, there is a villain, someone to blame, someone to hate, someone to point at as the cause of everything that went wrong. But Titanic does something unusual and quietly brilliant. It has no true villain. The character of Cal Hockley, played by Billy Zane, is cold and controlling and occasionally cruel. But he is not the reason the ship sinks. He does not cause the tragedy. The iceberg is not a villain. The ship's captain is not a monster. Even the crew members who lock the third-class passengers below deck are portrayed less as evil people and more as people following terrible rules in a terrible system. The villain of Titanic, if there is one, is arrogance. It is the belief that human beings had built something so powerful that nature itself could not stop it. James Cameron was very deliberate about this choice. He wanted the audience to feel grief, not hatred. He wanted the tragedy to land like a real tragedy, not a story about bad guys, but a story about fate, hubris, and the terrible randomness of disaster. The real enemy in Titanic is pride. The men who said the ship was unsinkable. The decisions that reduced the number of lifeboats. The pressure to arrive in New York on schedule. The belief that nothing could go wrong. That quiet, invisible villain is much scarier than any human antagonist could ever be. Not a monster in the dark, just a choice no one thought to question. Number 13, Celine Dion. Almost didn't record the theme song. You cannot think about Titanic without hearing My Heart Will Go On in your head. That song became one of the most famous pieces of music in movie history. But here is the thing. Celine Dion almost never recorded it. She was not sure about the song. She was not sure it was right for her. And the story of how it ended up in the film is almost as dramatic as the film itself. Composer James Horner wrote the melody for the film without telling Cameron at first. Cameron had actually told Horner at one point that he did not want a big pop song attached to the film. He wanted an orchestral score. He felt a pop ballad would cheapen the experience. Horner disagreed. He believed a song could unlock an emotional door in the audience that nothing else could open. So, Horner secretly worked on the song with lyricist Will Jennings and brought it to Celine Dion without Cameron's knowledge. Dion was hesitant but agreed to record a demo. Just one take, in the morning, almost as a favor. That demo recording was so beautiful, so emotionally powerful, that when Horner finally played it for Cameron, the director could not say no. Cameron loved it, even though he had said he would never allow it. The song was included in the film. It played over the closing credits. And then it took over the entire world. My Heart Will Go On became one of the best-selling singles in history. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It made Celine Dion even more famous than she already was, which seemed almost impossible at the time. One morning, one demo, one song that almost wasn't. Number 12. The ship broke in half on camera. One of the most visually stunning and emotionally devastating moments in the film is when the Titanic breaks apart on the surface of the ocean. The ship tilts almost vertical, and then, with a massive, grinding, terrible sound, it splits in two. For a long time, this was actually controversial, because many survivors of the real disaster said the ship did not break apart. They insisted it sank in one piece. For decades, the official story was that the Titanic went down whole. James Cameron researched the evidence and disagreed. He believed the ship did break apart, based on the position of the wreck at the bottom of the ocean and other physical evidence. He made the bold creative decision to show the ship breaking in half, even though it was not yet universally accepted as fact. And history proved him right. Later investigations and deep-sea research confirmed beyond any doubt that the Titanic did indeed break apart near the surface before sinking. The two halves of the ship lie nearly a third of a mile apart on the ocean floor, which is itself proof of a violent surface break. Cameron's instinct, backed by his research, turned out to be historically accurate. To film the breakup scene, the production team built a massive mechanism that could tilt the rear section of the ship replica upward while the set pieces and water moved around it. Actors were suspended on harnesses. Others slid down ramps. The mechanics of filming that scene were extraordinarily complex and genuinely dangerous. He trusted the evidence when others trusted the legend. Number 11. Over 5,000 extras. Modern films often use computer-generated crowds to fill a scene with hundreds or thousands of people. But in 1997, digital crowd technology was still in its early stages. So when James Cameron needed to fill the decks of the Titanic with panicking, running, screaming passengers, he used real people. Thousands of them. At the peak of production, the crew numbered over 1,000 people working behind the scenes, and the number of extras brought in to fill the ship during key scenes reached over 5,000 individuals across the filming period. These were real men, women, and children, not computer images, dressed in period costumes, arranged on decks, guided through chaotic scenes involving real water and real physical action. Managing 5,000 extras is an enormous logistical challenge. Each person needs a costume, hair, and makeup appropriate to their class and era. Each person needs to be told where to stand, how to react, where to run. Hundreds of background actors are playing first-class passengers in elegant dinnerwear, while hundreds of others are playing steerage passengers in rough, working-class clothing. The detail required to make all of those people look authentically like passengers from 1912 is almost unimaginable. Cameron himself was known to move through the extras between takes, adjusting details, repositioning people, checking the composition of the shot from multiple angles. He was obsessive about every person in the frame looking right, not just the leads, not just the speaking roles. Every single person visible on screen needed to feel real. 5,000 Strangers became one unforgettable tragedy. Number 10. The carpet pattern was recreated. Exactly. This is the kind of detail that most directors would never bother with. Most audiences would never notice. But James Cameron noticed. When preparing the production design for the film, researchers dug through historical archives looking for any photograph or document that could show exactly what the Titanic's interiors looked like. And buried in those archives, they found something remarkable. A photograph that clearly showed the pattern of the carpet used in the first-class corridors of the ship. Cameron insisted that the carpet in the film matched that pattern exactly, not approximately. Exactly. A special textile company was commissioned to recreate the original carpet design using period-accurate colors and materials. The carpet was then manufactured and installed throughout the first-class interior sets of the replica ship. Nobody watching the film is thinking about the carpet. Nobody sits in the theater and says, "Oh, that carpet pattern looks just like the one in the archive photograph from 1912. It does not work that way. What it does instead is create a feeling, a sensation of absolute reality. When every small detail is correct, when the carpet and the wallpaper and the light fixtures and the door handles all match historical records, the whole world of the film begins to breathe. It feels like a real place rather than a set. That is the invisible magic of obsessive design. You do not see the effort, you just feel the truth. A carpet nobody noticed made everything feel more real. Number 9. James Cameron wrote the script in 8 weeks. Given the enormous complexity of this film, the historical research, the underwater photography, the dual narrative, the balance between the love story and the disaster, you might imagine that the script took years to write. Actually, James Cameron wrote the first draft of the Titanic screenplay in approximately 8 weeks. He locked himself away and wrote at an extraordinary speed, driven by the vision he already had fully formed in his head. Cameron had been developing the idea for the film since before he even started shooting his previous movie, True Lies, which came out in 1994. He was fascinated by the Titanic. He had read everything he could find about the disaster. He had studied the history deeply. So when he finally sat down to write, the story came pouring out of him like water. He did not need months to figure out what to say. He already knew. The writing was just the act of putting the picture in his head onto the page. The love story between Jack and Rose was Cameron's own invention, a fictional thread he wove through the very real historical fabric of the disaster. He created both characters from scratch. Jack Dawson and Rose DeWitt Bukater never existed. But by placing two invented people inside the real tragedy, Cameron found a way to make audiences feel the loss personally, emotionally, as if it had happened to people they knew. A real disaster. Fictional hearts, a true feeling. Number 8. The water in the tank was not always cold. You might imagine that filming in a massive outdoor water tank near the ocean in Mexico would involve pleasant conditions. You would be wrong. The production built a 14 million-gallon tank for the film, the largest outdoor film tank ever constructed at the time. The tank held an almost unimaginable amount of water, and while the tank itself was not chilled to icy temperatures, the conditions for the cast were still brutal. The water temperature fluctuated depending on the weather and the time of day. During early morning calls, the water could be genuinely cold enough to cause shivering and muscle cramping within minutes. The cast, including DiCaprio, Winslet, and dozens of extras, spent hours in that water during the flooding sequences. Between takes, wet and shivering, they would huddle under warming blankets and heaters that were set up around the edges of the tank. Then Cameron would call action and they would go back in. The physical toll was significant. Beyond the cold, the actors were performing in a moving, flooding set with real water pressure pushing against them, real debris floating around them, and real physical danger in the form of underwater set pieces that could trap or injure someone if they were not careful. Safety divers were stationed underwater throughout every flooding sequence, ready to help any actor who got into trouble. The camera made it look like panic. Some of it actually was. Number 7. The film was originally going to be shorter. James Cameron's original cut of Titanic ran for over 3 hours. The studio was horrified. They pushed hard for Cameron to cut the film down significantly. In Hollywood, a 3-hour film is considered a major risk. Long films mean fewer showings per day in each theater. Fewer showings mean fewer ticket sales. The studio wanted a film that could be shown 4 or 5 times a day. A 3-hour film could only be shown 2 or 3 times at most. Cameron refused. He argued that the film needed every minute of its running time. The love story needed to breathe. The audience needed to fall in love with Jack and Rose before the ship hit the iceberg. If you cut the first hour, the disaster would mean nothing. If you rush the relationship, the audience feels nothing when the tragedy strikes. The emotional power of the ending depends entirely on how deeply you have fallen for these two people. And falling in love, even in the movies, takes time. Cameron won the argument. The film stayed at 3 hours and 14 minutes, and the audiences agreed with him. Rather than leaving the theater exhausted by the length, audiences sat through the film again and again. Some people watched it 5, 6, 7 times. Teenagers bought tickets on weekends just to cry at the ending one more time. The length was not a problem. It was the point. The film took long enough to break your heart properly. Choppers. Number 6. Kathy Bates based her performance on real history. Kathy Bates played Molly Brown in the film, a real historical figure who survived the Titanic disaster and became famous for her bravery, energy, and refusal to quietly accept the injustice of class divide. Bates, known for her powerful and deeply detailed performances, did not just show up and play a loud, fun character. She researched the real Molly Brown extensively. Margaret Molly Brown was a self-made woman from a poor background who married well and became rich, but never lost her connection to ordinary people. When the Titanic sank, she helped row her lifeboat and famously tried to convince the officer in charge to go back and rescue more survivors from the freezing water. He refused. Brown was furious. She became an activist after the disaster, fighting for the rights of survivors and working to improve conditions for workers and immigrants. Bates studied photographs of the real Brown. She read her letters and accounts of her behavior on the ship. She tried to capture not just the humor and energy of the woman, but also the fire underneath, the moral courage that made Brown so remarkable in a world where wealthy women were expected to stay quiet and decorative. In the film, Molly Brown is often played as comic relief, the loud, funny outsider among the stiff first-class passengers. But Bates understood that the comedy was armor. Underneath it was a woman who genuinely cared about people and was not afraid to say so. The laughter was real. The courage behind it was realer. Number 5. The dinner scene required. Weeks of rehearsal. One of the film's most memorable and beautifully observed scenes is the dinner sequence in the first-class dining room, where Jack Dawson, a third-class passenger who won his ticket in a card game, sits down to dine with the most elegant and powerful people on the ship. He has borrowed a suit. He has been coached by Molly Brown. He has no practice in this world, and he has to survive the meal without revealing himself. This scene required weeks of rehearsal. The period etiquette of 1912 first-class dining was extremely specific. Which fork to use for which course, how to hold a wine glass, when to speak and when to stay silent, how to sit, how to cut meat, how to engage with a butler without acknowledging the awkwardness of being served by another person. All of these details were coached into the cast by experts in historical etiquette. Leonardo DiCaprio, in particular, worked hard on this scene. He needed to play a character who was pretending to be confident while actually absorbing an enormous amount of information in real time. Jack Dawson watches and mirrors and learns throughout the dinner. That quality, bright, observant, fast, needed to feel natural rather than performed. DiCaprio spent hours working out the physical and emotional choreography of that one meal. The forks mattered. The posture mattered. Every tiny gesture told the story. Number 4. The iceberg sequence. Took 3 weeks to film. The moment the Titanic strikes the iceberg is one of the most quietly terrifying moments in the film. It does not happen with an explosion or a massive impact that throws everyone off their feet. It happens almost gently, a long, slow, grinding scrape along the side of the ship, a vibration felt more than heard, a scattering of ice chunks across the lower deck. And then silence, and people look at each other and wonder if something happened, or if they imagined it. Filming that sequence took 3 weeks, not because the technical effects were complicated, though they were, but because Cameron wanted every beat of it to feel precise and real. He studied the accounts of survivors and the historical record of exactly what happened on the night of April 14, 1912, almost minute by minute. He wanted the film to match the real timeline as closely as possible. The ice that falls on the deck during the iceberg collision was real ice, not foam or plastic. The crew had to keep producing and replacing ice between takes. The actors playing the steerage passengers who come out to play with the falling ice were instructed to behave exactly as witnesses described the real passengers behaving, curious, even playful, not yet understanding what had just been set in motion. 3 weeks to film a collision that lasted 10 seconds on screen. A collision that took the real ship 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. 10 seconds of quiet, 2 hours of chaos, 3 weeks to tell it right. Number 3. The film won 11 Academy Awards. When Titanic was released in December of 1997, it did not just become a box office success. It swept through the awards season like the wave it depicted on screen. At the Academy Awards held in March of 1998, Titanic was nominated for 14 Oscars and won 11 of them. That tied the record for most wins in a single year, a record previously held by Ben-Hur from 1959. Among the awards it won were Best Picture, Best Director for James Cameron, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Original Score for James Horner, and Best Original Song for My Heart Will Go On. The technical awards it won reflected the extraordinary craftsmanship behind the film, the visual effects, the sound design, the costume design, the art direction. Every department that poured themselves into creating the world of the Titanic was recognized on that stage. James Cameron's acceptance speech for Best Director became one of the most remembered moments of that night. He stood at the podium and, with a voice full of genuine emotion, echoed a line from the film. "I'm the king of the world." It was theatrical. It was dramatic. It was exactly what you would expect from the man who had just made the most expensive, most ambitious, most emotionally devastating film of its time. Some found it excessive. Most found it earned. 11 golden statues for one golden film. Number 2, DiCaprio and Winslet formed a real friendship that lasted decades. The chemistry between Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet on screen is so natural, so warm, so genuinely felt that audiences have always wondered if there was something real between them. The answer is not a romance, but something in some ways more beautiful and more lasting. The two actors became genuine, deep, lifelong friends during the making of the film. Making Titanic was hard. It was long. It was physically punishing and emotionally demanding. The two lead actors spent months working side by side in cold water in exhausting conditions, under the pressure of an enormous production. They laughed together. They complained together. They helped each other through difficult scenes and difficult days. By the time the film wrapped, they were not just colleagues. They were family. In the years that followed, DiCaprio and Winslet appeared at each other's events. They supported each other through personal hardships. When Winslet won her Academy Award for The Reader in 2009, her first Oscar win after years of deserving it, DiCaprio was in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. A photograph captured him clapping with pure, unrestrained joy for his friend. They have spoken publicly about each other with a kind of tenderness that is rare between co-stars. DiCaprio has described Winslet as one of the most important people in his life. She has said similar things about him. The love story in the film faded into fiction. The friendship in real life kept growing. Jack and Rose lived for one night. Leo and Kate lived for decades. Number 1, the sinking scene was filmed with real people on a tilting set. Here it is, the big one, the moment that defines the film, the sinking, the final catastrophic descent of the Titanic, the ship tilting almost vertical, hundreds of people sliding and falling and clinging and letting go, the noise, the dark, the cold. It is one of the most overwhelming sequences in cinema history. And James Cameron filmed it with real people on a real set that really tilted. The production team built a section of the stern of the Titanic on a hydraulic platform that could tilt up to nearly 90 degrees. Actors and extras were attached to harnesses hidden beneath their period costumes. Stunt coordinators spent weeks choreographing exactly who fell where, who slid down which section, who held on, and who let go. Safety teams were positioned throughout the set. Multiple cameras rolled simultaneously because there would be no second chance. Some of these moments involved set destruction that could only happen once. When Cameron called action and the platform began to rise, the scene that unfolded was genuinely chaotic. Even with all the planning, even with the choreography and the safety systems, the sheer physical reality of a massive set tilting while dozens of people moved through it produced real adrenaline, real fear, and real reactions that no actor could have manufactured in a controlled studio environment. People grabbed railings with white-knuckle grip. Extras slipped in unexpected directions. The production design, everything built and dressed on that tilting set, began to move in ways that nobody could entirely predict. Cameron moved through all of it, calling adjustments, repositioning cameras, shouting notes while the chaos rolled around him. He was inside the scene the way a conductor is inside a symphony, not just watching it, but feeling every beat of it, shaping it even as it happened. The final cut of the sinking sequence in the film draws from dozens of different setups, angles, and takes. Some moments are digital effects, some are models. But the heart of it, the human heart, the falling bodies, the hands letting go of railings, the eyes full of terror and grief, that was all real. Real people, real fear, a real set falling into the dark. It looked like the end of the world. On set, some of it actually felt that way. Bonus fact: the painting Jack drew was really James Cameron's hand. Here is a story that fans of the film rarely know, and it is one of the most quietly personal secrets hidden inside one of the most famous films ever made. In one of the film's most intimate and iconic scenes, Jack Dawson sketches a portrait of Rose wearing the heart of the ocean diamond. The camera shows his hands moving across the sketchbook, drawing with confidence and grace. The finished portrait, a beautiful, delicate, emotionally charged drawing of a young woman, is a stunning piece of artwork. Those hands do not belong to Leonardo DiCaprio. They belong to James Cameron. Cameron himself made the drawings. He is an accomplished visual artist who has sketched and painted throughout his life, and he felt that no art director or hired hand artist could capture exactly the quality and style he wanted for Jack's sketchbook. So Cameron drew them himself personally, while the cameras filmed his hands from DiCaprio's perspective. This means that the most intimate creative act in the film, a fictional artist drawing the woman he loves, is actually the director expressing his love for the story he was telling. Cameron was not just behind the camera. In that moment, his hands were in the frame, his lines were on the paper, his vision was literally being drawn into existence by his own fingers. The sketchbook that appears in the film contains multiple drawings, sketches of other passengers, studies of hands and faces, images that Jack supposedly made during the voyage. Cameron drew all of them. Each one tells a small story. Each one reflects the eye of a man who sees beauty in the details that most people walk past without noticing, just like the director himself. The man behind the camera was also the hand inside the frame. The artist and the filmmaker were the same person all along. One hand, two stories, the same love for every detail. Titanic is not just a movie about a ship that sank. It is a story about what it means to be human, to love fiercely, to lose terribly, and to keep going anyway. It is about the people who danced one night and were gone the next, about the ones who survived and carried the memory of those they lost, about the arrogance of believing we can build something that nature cannot break, and about the stubborn, beautiful truth that even in the middle of the worst disaster imaginable, people still reached out to help each other. James Cameron did not just tell that story. He lived it, dove for it, built it, destroyed it, rebuilt it, and refused to let anyone water it down. The people who worked on that film gave everything they had, and the audience felt it. That is why people cried. That is why they came back again and again, not just for the love story, but for the truth at the center of it, that life is short, that beauty is fragile, that some choices echo forever. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them one story at a time.